The German tanks had little reason to fear the tiny airplane above them. It had no armor, no machine guns, and a fabric-covered body that looked more suitable for a country airfield than a battlefield. Its engine produced only 65 horsepower. A fast truck could nearly match its cruising speed, but beneath its wings were 6 infantry bazookas, wired to fire from the cockpit. The pilot was Major Charles Carpenter, a high school history teacher who had become an artillery observer. In the fog over eastern France, he was about to dive toward armored vehicles in a machine never designed to attack anything. The question was not whether this little plane could destroy a tank. The first question was whether it could survive long enough to get close. The airplane was a Piper L-4 Grasshopper, the military version of the familiar Piper Cub. It was built to observe, carry messages, move an officer, and help artillery crews see beyond the next hill. Its great advantage was not speed or strength. It was simplicity. An L-4 could rise from a rough strip cut into a field, fly low over a road, and land beside an armored column. The cabin had windows all around, giving the pilot a clear view of the ground. In a fast-moving campaign, that view was priceless. Commanders could learn what waited around a bend without sending men forward blindly. Artillery batteries could correct their fire within minutes. The little Grasshopper was an eye in the sky, but it was a very exposed eye. The men who flew these aircraft lived close to the troops they supported. They operated from muddy strips, slept near gun positions, and moved whenever the front moved. A rifle could damage their aircraft. A burst from a machine gun could tear through the thin skin and the pilot behind it. Flying higher made them easier targets for German fighters. Flying lower placed them within reach of almost every weapon on the ground. The safest defense was to remain small, quiet, and difficult to notice. German troops often paid more attention to fighters and bombers than to a slow observation plane. That habit gave an L-4 pilot a narrow form of protection. Charles Carpenter would turn that protection into surprise. Before the war, Carpenter taught history in Illinois. He understood how battles were described after they ended, with clean arrows on maps and decisive names printed beneath them. In 1944, serving with the U.S. 4th Armored Division, he saw the opposite. The advance across France was dust, broken roads, missed turns, fuel trucks, wounded men, and sudden reports of enemy armor. Carpenter's normal work mattered. From his L-4, he scouted ahead of columns, passed warnings by radio, and helped commanders understand the ground. Yet he was not content to watch danger and call someone else. Other artillery pilots had experimented with mounting bazookas beneath their aircraft. Their results gave Carpenter an idea that was reckless, practical, and perfectly suited to his temperament. The bazooka was a shoulder-fired anti-tank weapon meant for an infantryman. Its rocket used a shaped charge designed to focus explosive energy against armor. It did not need the speed of an artillery shell to work. It needed to strike at the right angle and at close range. Mechanics attached launch tubes to the L-4's wing supports. The early arrangement carried fewer tubes. Carpenter pushed the idea further until 3 bazookas sat beneath each wing, 6 in all. Wires ran into the cockpit so he could fire them in pairs or in sequence. The aircraft was still slow and unarmored. Now it was also carrying weapons that produced smoke, blast, and drag only a few feet from its fabric body. The modified plane received a name, Rosie the Rocketer, a play on Rosie the Riveter, the symbol of American factory workers. The joke made sense when the aircraft sat on the ground. In the air, it became something stranger. The pilot had no modern gun sight. He could not hover and take careful aim. He had to point the entire airplane at the target, dive, judge the distance, fire, and pull away before the ground filled his windshield. The bazooka rocket also lost accuracy over distance. Carpenter therefore had to come close. The best place to hit a tank was often its thinner upper armor, but reaching that angle meant exposing the L-4 to rifles, machine guns, and every nervous crewman below. By September 1944, General George Patton's Third Army had raced far beyond Normandy and into Lorraine. Speed had brought success, but it had also stretched supply lines. The 4th Armored Division moved through country where villages, ridges, woods, and folds in the ground could hide armored formations until they were dangerously near. Around Arracourt, German commanders launched strong counterattacks with newly assembled armored units. Their Panther tanks carried powerful guns and thick frontal armor. On paper, a Panther and a Piper L-4 did not belong in the same fight. One was a 40-ton armored weapon. The other weighed little more than half a ton empty and could be pushed by men on the ground. Fog made the difference more dangerous. It hid the German approach and kept powerful Allied fighter bombers from providing their usual help. Tank crews could move closer before being seen. American support units behind the front, including vulnerable supply points, suddenly faced the possibility of being overrun. Carpenter took off when the weather made flying difficult and useful vision came only through openings in the mist. At first, finding the enemy was a problem. Then the fog began to break. Below him were German armored vehicles moving toward positions where men, trucks, and supplies had little protection. The tiny aircraft had found the threat, but reporting it was no longer enough for Carpenter. He warned the men on the ground and turned the L-4 toward the German formation. The first diving attack showed how uncertain the weapon really was. Later Army aviation accounts describe early rockets missing before Carpenter corrected his approach. That detail matters because it separates the real event from the effortless legend. He was not pressing a button from safety. He was learning the behavior of an improvised weapon while diving into ground fire. He leveled, climbed just enough to turn, and came back. Each pass told the German crews that the harmless observation plane was no longer harmless. It also gave them another chance to shoot him down. Carpenter fired his remaining rockets, returned to reload, and went back into the fight. Accounts differ on the exact date and on the final damage, but they agree on the extraordinary core. He flew repeated sorties against German armor during the Battle of Arracourt, using bazookas fastened to his L-4. Some histories describe 16 rockets fired that day. Ground witnesses credited him with hits on tanks and armored cars, and with helping a trapped support crew escape. The sudden attacks forced German crews to look upward, turn weapons away from the ground fight, and reconsider an advance they had expected to make under cover of fog. The little plane could not win the armored battle alone, but it could interrupt the enemy at a critical moment. If a fragile observation pilot diving on German tanks feels like a story worth remembering, subscribe to Frontline Brief, leave a like, and tell us in the comments whether you would have made a second pass. The danger increased after surprise disappeared. German soldiers who had once ignored Cubs began firing at them. Carpenter later explained that the enemy seemed to understand what the bazooka-equipped planes could do. Every appearance drew more attention from the ground. That changed the balance of each attack. On the first pass, disbelief might protect him. On the next, the tank column would be waiting. The L-4 offered no armor plate, no self-sealing fuel tanks, and no second engine. If its small engine stopped, Carpenter had only the fields and roads below him. Several bullet holes were discovered in Rosie the Rocketer during its eventual restoration, physical reminders that the airplane had not passed through the war untouched. Newspapers loved the image of a history teacher hunting tanks in a Piper Cub. It was simple, visual, and almost impossible to forget. Reports turned Carpenter into Bazooka Charlie or the Mad Major. By the end of the war, later institutional histories credited him with destroying 6 tanks. Some versions added specific heavy tanks and armored vehicles, yet a careful telling has to stop before certainty becomes theater. An Army aviation history notes that higher headquarters could not find physical evidence to confirm every claim after the Arracourt action. German recovery teams may have removed or repaired damaged vehicles, and battlefield reports were often incomplete. The 6-tank credit belongs to the record of the legend, but it is not a license to present every later claim as proven. That uncertainty does not make the story smaller. The aircraft existed. The 6 bazooka tubes existed. Contemporary reporters saw Carpenter and his plane. The 4th Armored Division used L-4s aggressively to scout ahead of its columns, and Army histories place Carpenter in the fog-shrouded fighting around Arracourt. He flew close enough to fire an infantry anti-tank weapon from a fabric airplane at German armored formations. Even if the exact number of destroyed tanks can never be settled, the effect on the men below was real. American crews saw an officer risk his life to warn and support them. German crews faced an attack from a direction they had not considered dangerous. Surprise, confusion, and courage do not appear neatly in a vehicle count. Carpenter's actions also revealed a larger change in warfare. The L-4 had been created as an observation platform, but field artillery pilots were discovering that an aircraft living with ground units could do more than watch. It could guide columns, direct fire, carry supplies, evacuate a wounded man, and in rare cases attack a target directly. The armed Grasshopper did not become a standard tank killer. It was too vulnerable, its rockets were too limited, and larger aircraft could deliver far more destructive power. But the idea of an Army aircraft working just above the battlefield, answering the immediate needs of troops below, would survive. Later generations would see that relationship in armed helicopters and forward air controllers. For Carpenter, the war did not end in a final perfect attack. In 1945, he became seriously ill and was later discharged. Doctors gave him a grim outlook, but he returned to Illinois and again became a history teacher. The man who had once flown over armored columns went back to a classroom. He also spent summers teaching young people outdoor skills. The contrast is easy to romanticize, but it fits the pattern of many veterans. A life divided between an experience almost no one at home could fully imagine and ordinary responsibilities that resumed as if the battlefield belonged to another person. Carpenter lived until 1966, far longer than the first medical prediction he had received. Rosie the Rocketer followed a different route. After the war, the L-4H carrying serial number 43-30426 remained in Europe and eventually lost its famous identity. Like thousands of surplus aircraft, it became an object with a practical use rather than a monument. Decades passed. Photographs preserved the unusual shape of Carpenter's bazookas and the lettering on the fuselage, but the actual airplane seemed gone. In 2017, researchers connected the military serial number to an aircraft held in Austria. The discovery turned the story from a collection of pictures into a surviving machine that could be measured, inspected, and restored. The airplane returned to the United States and was rebuilt in its wartime appearance. Restorers reproduced the olive finish, markings, and bazooka installation that had made it famous. Today, Rosie, the Rocketer, is displayed at the American Heritage Museum in Massachusetts, positioned in the War in Europe gallery near a German Panther tank. The museum arrangement makes the scale of the 1944 encounter visible at once. The tank is heavy, armored, and built around a large gun. The L-4 above it is narrow, light, and almost delicate. No title card is needed to explain the imbalance. It looks exactly like the wrong airplane for the job. That imbalance is why Charles Carpenter's story survived. It is tempting to remember only the nickname, the 6 tubes, and the disputed total of tanks. But the human decision was more important. He saw a machine with severe limits and asked what it could still do for men on the ground. He accepted that the first rockets might miss. He accepted that surprise would vanish after the first attack. Then he turned back and made another pass. Courage in this story was not proof that the plan was safe. It was the decision to act while knowing that it was not. The final lesson is not that every rule should be broken or every fragile aircraft should be armed. Improvisation without judgment can kill the people it is meant to save. Carpenter's experiment worked because it joined a specific weapon, a specific target, a pilot who understood the ground battle, and a moment when normal air support was trapped above the fog. The little L-4 did not replace artillery, tanks, or fighter bombers. It filled a gap for a few dangerous minutes. That is often how battlefield innovation begins, not with a perfect new system, but with a person close enough to the problem to see an opening. German tank crews once looked at the Piper Cub and saw an unarmed observer. Charles Carpenter changed what that silhouette meant. After his attacks, a slow plane above the trees could no longer be dismissed. It might be watching. It might be calling artillery. Or it might be carrying 6 bazookas and turning toward the column. The exact number of tanks it destroyed may remain disputed. The transformation is not. A history teacher took one of the weakest aircraft over the battlefield and made it dangerous through nerve, mechanics, and surprise. Rosie the Rocketer still hangs above a Panther today, preserving the moment when a machine built only to sea decided to strike.